London, 1813. Genevieve Lawton pressed her back against the marble column, her heart fluttering like a trapped sparrow in her chest. The ballroom of Harrington House, ablaze with 1,000 candles, stretched before her in all its intimidating glory. Ladies in silks and satins twirled across the polished floor, jewels twinkling at their throats and wrists, while gentlemen in impeccable evening dress looked on with practiced indifference. "You cannot hide all evening, Miss Lawton," came the amused voice of Lady Helena Spencer, her childhood friend and tonight's co-conspirator. "The gown looks marvellous on you. No one would ever suspect it was not made expressly for your figure." Genevieve ran her hands nervously over the exquisite periwinkle silk, so fine it seemed to shimmer beneath her fingertips. The modiste had designed it for Lady Helena, but after an unexpected growth spurt, it no longer fit her petite friend. "I feel like an imposter," Genevieve whispered. "What if someone recognizes it?" "Nonsense. No one has seen it before tonight. Besides, who would imagine the daughter of a country vicar would appear at the Harrington ball in a gown worth more than her father's yearly stipend?" Helena's eyes danced with mischief. "Now, stop hiding. You are here as my guest, and perfectly entitled to enjoy yourself." Genevieve nodded, though the knot in her stomach tightened. This adventure had seemed thrilling back in Helena's bedchamber, but now, surrounded by the cream of London society, she felt woefully out of place. She had only arrived in London 3 days prior, summoned by her godmother, Lady Wetherby, to serve as companion during the season. This unexpected invitation to the most coveted ball of the spring had come courtesy of Helena, who had declared it a crime against beauty for Genevieve to remain hidden away. "There's Lord Harrington greeting new arrivals," Helena observed. "And beside him, goodness! It's the Duke of Jarviston. I had heard he returned from the continent, but I scarcely believed it. He's been away for 5 years at least." "A duke?" Genevieve peered around the column. The man standing beside their host was tall and broad-shouldered, with the confident bearing of one accustomed to command. Even from a distance, she could see that his face was strikingly handsome, with sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw. His dark hair was unfashionably short, and he wore his evening clothes with an elegant simplicity that made the other gentlemen appear overdressed. "James Jarviston," Helena supplied. "Inherited the dukedom while fighting in the peninsula. They say he's as formidable in the ballroom as he was on the battlefield. Every matchmaking mamma in London has set her cap at him, but he's shown no interest in matrimony thus far. He looks—" Genevieve struggled to find the right word. "Severe." "Discerning," Helena corrected with a smile. "And worth 20,000 a year. Now, come. The next set is forming, and I promise my cousin Richard a dance. He'll be delighted to stand up with you for the one after." Before Genevieve could protest, Helena had seized her arm and pulled her into the throng. Lord Richard Spencer proved to be a pleasant partner, with an easy conversation that helped calm Genevieve's nerves. As they promenaded down the set, she began to enjoy herself, taking in the spectacle around them. The dance floor was a kaleidoscope of color, the music bright and lively. Perhaps Helena had been right to insist she come. When the dance concluded, Lord Richard bowed over her hand. "Miss Lawton, it has been a pleasure. Might I fetch you some refreshment?" "Thank you, that would be most kind." As Lord Richard departed, Genevieve felt a prickling sensation at the nape of her neck. Turning slightly, she found herself fixed by an intense gaze from across the room. The Duke of Jarviston was watching her, his dark eyes assessing. She quickly looked away, her cheeks warming. What had caught his attention? Was there something amiss with her appearance? Had he somehow divined that she wore a borrowed gown? She smoothed the skirts nervously, trying to appear nonchalant. When she chanced another glance in his direction, he was making his way toward her with purposeful strides. "Good evening, miss." His voice was deep, with the crisp diction of a military man. "Lawton, your grace." "Genevieve Lawton." She cursed, hoping her form was correct. She had practiced courtesies in the rectory drawing-room, but never before a duke. "Miss Lawton." He inclined his head. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "No, your grace." I am newly arrived in London. Lady Weatherby is my godmother. Ah, Caroline Weatherby. A formidable woman. His lips curved in what might have been a smile. Are you enjoying the ball, Miss Lawton? Very much, Your Grace. The lie came easily to her lips, a social necessity. One dark brow rose skeptically. Indeed? You appeared rather strategically positioned behind that column earlier. Heat flooded her cheeks. You noticed? I make it a habit to observe everything, Miss Lawton. His gaze swept over her, lingering on the periwinkle silk. Particularly things of beauty. Was he flirting with her? Surely not. Dukes did not flirt with penniless vicars' daughters. The musicians are readying for the next set, he said. A waltz, if I'm not mistaken. Would you do me the honor? Genevieve's heart leapt to her throat. That is. I haven't received permission to waltz, Your Grace. His eyes glinted with amusement. A technicality easily remedied. Wait here. Before she could respond, he had strode away toward Lady Weatherby, who sat among the dowagers at the edge of the ballroom. Genevieve watched in disbelief as they conversed briefly. Her godmother cast a sharp glance in her direction, then nodded to the Duke. He returned wearing a satisfied expression. Permission granted, Miss Lawton. Shall we? She placed her gloved hand in his, suddenly aware of how intimate this dance would be. The waltz had only recently been deemed acceptable in polite society, and even then, only for those who had received explicit permission from the patronesses of Almack's or their chaperones. As he led her onto the floor, whispers rippled through the crowd. The Duke of Jarviston dancing with an unknown country girl? It was unprecedented. You've caused quite a stir, Your Grace, she murmured as he placed his hand at her waist. Have I? He guided her into the first turn with effortless grace. I thought it was you causing the stir, Miss Lawton. The mysterious beauty in the periwinkle gown. Hardly mysterious, Your Grace. I am merely a visitor to London. A visitor who arrived at the Harrington ball in a gown with a story, I think. His voice dropped lower, for her ears alone. Will you tell me your secret, Miss Lawton? Her step faltered. My secret. He steadied her smoothly, drawing her a fraction closer than propriety strictly allowed. The gown, he said, his breath warm against her ear. It's Lady Helena Spencer's, is it not? Genevieve's blood ran cold. How could you possibly? The colour is unmistakable. I happened to be at Madame Delacroix's establishment when Lady Helena was fitted. The modiste commented that the shade was created specifically for her. Then you must think me terribly presumptuous, Genevieve said, mortification washing over her. On the contrary. I find it intriguing. His eyes held hers, dark and searching. Most young ladies would never dare such a thing, for fear of social ruin. I am not a most young ladies, Your Grace. No, he agreed, you most certainly are not. He guided her through another turn, his hand firm at her waist. Tell me, Miss Lawton, what brings you to London? Are you searching for a husband, like every other young lady of marriageable age? My ambitions are rather more modest, she replied. I am here as my godmother's companion. Lady Weatherby's eyesight is failing, though she'd never admit it. Commendable, but surely you have hopes beyond reading to Caroline and sorting her correspondence. Genevieve hesitated. I hope to see a bit of London before returning home. The British Museum, perhaps. The Tower. Westminster Abbey. Not Almack's? Or Vauxhall Gardens. The usual hunting grounds for husband-seekers. I have no fortune, Your Grace. Even if I harboured matrimonial aspirations, I am not a practical choice for most gentlemen. His expression darkened. Most gentlemen are fools. The music swelled around them, and for several measures, they danced in silence. Genevieve was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, the subtle scent of sandalwood that clung to him, the way his eyes never left her face. You dance well, Miss Lawton. Thank you, Your Grace. My mother insisted upon it, though we had few opportunities for such entertainments in our village. And where is home? Thornfield, in Hertfordshire. My father is the vicar there. A man of God, the Duke mused. How does he feel about his daughter wearing borrowed finery to attend a ball full of London's most notorious sinners? Genevieve couldn't help but smile. He would say that even sinners deserve compassion, Your Grace. And that appearances can be deceiving. Wise words. His expression softened. And your mother? What would she say about tonight's adventure? She died 3 years ago, Genevieve said quietly. But I think she would have laughed. She always encouraged a bit of daring. I am sorry for your loss. His voice held genuine sympathy. I'm grateful for her encouragement of daring. Without it, I might never have had the pleasure of this dance. The waltz was drawing to a close, and Genevieve felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. She had enjoyed their conversation far more than she should have. As the final notes faded, the Duke bowed over her hand. Thank you, Miss Lawton. It has been. He paused, as if searching for the right word, illuminating. You are too kind, Your Grace. Not at all. He straightened, his gaze still holding hers. I hope you will save me another dance this evening. Perhaps the supper dance? Genevieve's pulse quickened. I would be honored. With another bow, he released her hand and stepped back. Until then. She watched him walk away, scarcely able to believe what had just transpired. The Duke of Jarviston had singled her out, discovered her secret, and asked for a second dance, all within the space of 15 minutes. Helena appeared at her side, eyes wide with excitement. Genevieve Lawton. Do you realize what just happened? You waltzed with the Duke of Jarviston. Yes, I was there, Genevieve replied, unable to suppress a smile. This is extraordinary. Every eligible lady in London has been trying to catch his eye since he returned from Spain, and he chose you for his first dance. Helena clutched her arm. What did you talk about? Did he compliment your gown? Was he as serious as they say? He knew the gown was yours, Genevieve whispered. He recognized it from the modistes. Helena's eyes widened. Lord save us! Did he expose you? No, quite the opposite. He seemed amused by it. And he's asked me for the supper dance. The supper dance? Helena's voice rose, drawing curious glances from nearby guests. She lowered it hastily. Do you know what that means? He intends to escort you to supper. You'll be the envy of every lady present. Genevieve shook her head, bewildered. But why me? I'm nobody. Clearly, the Duke disagrees. Helena's expression grew thoughtful. Though it does make one wonder what James Jarviston is about. He's not known for impulsive behavior. Quite the opposite, they called him the strategist during the war for his meticulous planning. A chill ran down Genevieve's spine. You think he has some ulterior motive in singling me out? Helena hesitated. I wouldn't go that far. But dukes don't typically waltz with vicars' daughters without reason. Perhaps his reason was simply to humiliate me, Genevieve suggested, sudden doubt clouding her earlier happiness. To expose me as an impostor in a borrowed gown. If that were the case, he'd hardly have asked for a second dance. Helena squeezed her hand reassuringly. No, I suspect his interest is genuine, though what prompted it, I cannot say. You must be on your guard, Genevieve. A duke's attention is both a blessing and a peril. Before Genevieve could respond, Lord Richard returned with a glass of lemonade. Miss Lawton, forgive my delay. The refreshment table was besieged. He glanced between the two ladies. Have I interrupted something important? Not at all, Helena said brightly. We were just discussing Miss Lawton's dance with the Duke of Jarviston. Lord Richard's eyebrows rose. Indeed? Well, that explains the commotion among the dowagers. Lady Jersey looks positively apoplectic. Genevieve accepted the lemonade with murmured thanks, trying to ignore the stares and whispers now directed her way. She had never sought attention, and the sudden scrutiny made her skin prickle uncomfortably. "If you'll excuse me," she said, "I believe I should check on Lady Weatherby." She retreated to where her godmother sat, surrounded by other matrons of similar age and status. Lady Weatherby, a tall, imperious woman with silver-streaked dark hair, raised her lorgnette as Genevieve approached. "So, my girl, you've made quite an impression on Jarviston." There was no mistaking the satisfaction in her voice. "Well done." "It was not by design, godmother." "The best conquests never are," Lady Weatherby replied cryptically. "Sit beside me a moment. There's something you should know." Genevieve perched on the edge of an empty chair, conscious of the curious gazes of Lady Weatherby's companions. "James Jarviston is not a man given to impulse," her godmother said, echoing Helena's assessment. "He chooses his actions with care, always with purpose. If he has singled you out, there is a reason." "So I've been told," Genevieve said, a thread of irritation creeping into her voice. Though no one seems able to discern what that reason might be. Lady Weatherby's lips thinned. "Mind your tone, child. I am trying to prepare you. The Duke's attention will not be universally welcomed. There are many who had set their sights on him for their daughters or themselves. I have no designs on the Duke, godmother." "Perhaps not, but he clearly has some interest in you. And that makes you a target." Lady Weatherby leaned closer. "Be wary of Lady Harrington. She had hopes of matching Jarviston with her niece, and she is not one to forgive interference." Genevieve glanced across the room to where their hostess stood, a woman of perhaps 40 with a fixed smile and assessing eyes. Even as Genevieve watched, those eyes turned in her direction, narrowing slightly. "I've done nothing to deserve her enmity," Genevieve protested. "In matters of the marriage mart, simply existing can be offense enough." Lady Weatherby patted her hand. "Now, off with you. Dance, enjoy yourself. But keep your wits about you, girl." Feeling more unsettled than ever, Genevieve moved back toward the dance floor. The next set was forming, and Lord Richard had promised to introduce her to some of his friends. She had scarcely taken 3 steps when a feminine voice stopped her. "Miss Lawton, is it not? What an unexpected pleasure." She turned to find herself face to face with Lady Harrington herself, the hostess's smile not reaching her cold blue eyes. "Lady Harrington," Genevieve cursed. "Thank you for allowing me to attend your magnificent ball. How could I refuse Lady Weatherby's goddaughter?" The older woman circled Genevieve slowly, her gaze assessing. "Though I confess, when Helena mentioned bringing a friend, I pictured someone more conventional." "I'm afraid I don't understand, my lady." "No?" Lady Harrington's smile tightened. "Perhaps I should be more direct. It's most unusual for a vicar's daughter to wear a gown of such obvious quality. One might almost think it borrowed." Genevieve's blood ran cold. First the Duke, and now Lady Harrington, was her deception so transparent? "The gown is lovely," she managed, neither confirming nor denying. "Indeed. The color is particularly striking. Almost identical to the shade Madame Delacroix created for Lady Helena last month." Lady Harrington's voice hardened. "I do hope you're not making a habit of accepting charity, Miss Lawton. Such behavior can lead to unfortunate rumors." Before Genevieve could formulate a response, a deep voice cut through the tension. "Lady Harrington, I've been searching for you." The Duke of Jarviston materialized at Genevieve's side, his expression pleasant but his eyes watchful. "I must compliment you on the orchestra. Their rendition of Mozart was exceptional." Lady Harrington's demeanor transformed instantly. "Your Grace! How kind of you to notice. I selected the musicians personally." "Your discernment is unparalleled," he replied smoothly. "I hope you don't mind if I borrow Miss Lawton? I believe this is our dance." It wasn't, but Lady Harrington could hardly contradict him. "Of course," she said, her smile brittle. "Miss Lawton, we shall continue our conversation later. As she swept away, Genevieve released a shaky breath. "Thank you, Your Grace." That was uncomfortable. "Elizabeth Harrington enjoys making people uncomfortable," he replied, offering his arm. "It's a talent she's honed over many years." Genevieve placed her hand on his sleeve, acutely aware of the firm muscle beneath the fine wool of his coat. She knew about the gown as well. Unsurprising. Little escapes her notice, especially in her own home. He led her toward a relatively quiet corner of the ballroom. "But you needn't fear her. Lady Harrington values her connection to me far more than she resents your presence." "Your connection?" "My father was her husband's closest friend. And more importantly, I hold the mortgages on 2 of her properties." A hint of steel entered his voice. "She would not risk antagonizing me." Genevieve stared at him, startled by this glimpse of calculated power. "You speak as though you anticipate her trying to harm me in some way." "Not harm. Merely discredit." His dark eyes met hers. "The tongue can be vicious to those it perceives as outsiders, Miss Lawton. Especially beautiful outsiders who attract attention." "I never sought attention," she said quietly. "Perhaps that is precisely why you've received it." He studied her face, his expression softening. "You are refreshingly genuine in a sea of artifice." His words stirred something within her, a dangerous warmth she dared not examine too closely. "You cannot know that, Your Grace. We've shared but one dance." "One dance, yes, but I've been watching you since you arrived." At her startled look, he added, "I told you, I make it a habit to observe everything." "And what have your observations revealed?" "That you are uncomfortable in crowds yet gracious to all who approach you. That you listen more than you speak. That your smile, when genuine, transforms your entire countenance." His voice deepened. "And that there is more to you than meets the eye, Miss Lawton." The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. No one had ever looked at her with such focused interest before. "You credit me with complexity I do not possess, Your Grace," she said, trying to lighten the mood. "I am merely a country vicar's daughter, far from home and wearing a borrowed gown. We are all more than our circumstances, Miss Lawton." He glanced toward the dance floor, where a new set was forming. "I believe Lord Richard is looking for you. May I escort you to him?" "Thank you, Your Grace." As they walked, he leaned closer. "Remember, the supper dance is mine. I shall count the minutes." With a bow, he handed her over to Lord Richard, leaving Genevieve with the unsettling sensation that her life had somehow shifted on its axis. The Duke's attention was flattering, bewildering, and not a little frightening. What could such a man possibly want with her? The evening progressed in a whirl of dances and conversations, but Genevieve found her thoughts returning repeatedly to the Duke. She caught glimpses of him across the room, dancing dutifully with the daughters of his peers, conversing with gentlemen in a corner, bowing over the hand of some dowager. Yet somehow, whenever she looked for him, his gaze was already upon her. By the time the musicians announced the supper dance, Genevieve's nerves were strung tight as violin strings. She had just finished a country dance with one of Lord Richard's friends when she felt a presence at her shoulder. "Miss Lawton." She turned to find the Duke, his hand extended toward her. "Your Grace," she said, placing her fingers in his. "You're very punctual." "A military habit," he replied, leading her onto the floor. "One doesn't keep artillery waiting." "Am I to be compared to artillery, sir?" she asked, a smile tugging at her lips despite her nervousness. "Only in your potential impact, Miss Lawton." His eyes gleamed with amusement. "Though I dare say you're considerably more pleasing to behold." The dance began, a lively cotillion that afforded little opportunity for private conversation. Genevieve was grateful for the reprieve, using the time to compose herself for the inevitable scrutiny that would accompany their supper. As the dance concluded, the Duke offered his arm. "Shall we?" He led her toward the supper room, where small tables had been arranged to allow guests to dine in relative comfort. Heads turned as they passed, conversations faltering mid-sentence. By tomorrow, Genevieve knew, her name would be on every gossip's lips in London. The Duke seemed oblivious to the stir they created, securing a table somewhat removed from the main crush and holding her chair with punctilious courtesy. He procured plates of delicacies from the buffet and returned to sit across from her, his manner entirely at ease. "You must be accustomed to being the centre of attention, Your Grace," Genevieve observed, nodding toward the many eyes fixed upon them. "An unfortunate consequence of rank," he replied. "One learns to ignore it." "Is that possible? To truly ignore the weight of so many expectations?" He considered her question seriously. "Not ignore, perhaps. Accept and manage, rather." His gaze sharpened. "You speak as though you understand the burden." On a much smaller scale, she admitted. "As the vicar's daughter, I've lived my life in a kind of glass house. The entire village watches, ready to note any misstep. Then we are not so different, you and I." She laughed softly. "I think many would disagree with that assessment, Your Grace." "Many lack imagination," he countered. "Tell me about Thornfield. Is it a pleasant place?" Surprised by his interest, Genevieve described her home, the ancient church with its Norman tower, the rectory with its rambling garden, the village green where May Day celebrations were held each spring. As she spoke, she found herself relaxing, drawn in by his attentive questions and genuine interest. "It sounds idyllic," he said when she finished. "Peaceful." "It is, though I confess I sometimes found it confining. There are few opportunities for a woman of limited means in such a place." "And what opportunities would you seek, if circumstances allowed?" Genevieve hesitated. "It's foolish. I doubt that very much. I've always wished to travel," she admitted. "To see the great cities of Europe, Paris, Rome, Vienna. To visit the ruins of Greece and the pyramids of Egypt. My father has a library filled with accounts of such places, but to see them with my own eyes." She trailed off, embarrassed by her own fervor. The Duke was watching her with an unreadable expression. "Not foolish at all," he said quietly. "I've been fortunate enough to see many of those places. They're every bit as magnificent as the books describe." "During the war?" "Some, yes. Others in my youth. My father believed travel an essential part of education." His expression clouded slightly. "Though I would prefer to see them again under more peaceful circumstances. The fighting was terrible, I imagine." "War is always terrible, Miss Lawton. Even when necessary." He shook off the somber mood with visible effort. "But this is hardly appropriate supper conversation. Forgive me." "There's nothing to forgive," she said gently. "I asked." His gaze softened. "You did. Most young ladies would have changed the subject to something more agreeable, the weather, perhaps, or the latest fashions. I am not most young ladies." "Yes, you've mentioned that." His lips curved in a genuine smile. "It is, perhaps, your most appealing quality." The warmth in his eyes made her cheeks flush. Before she could respond, a shadow fell across their table. "Your Grace, Miss Lawton." Lady Harrington stood before them, her smile fixed. "I trust you're enjoying the supper." "Immensely," the Duke replied. "Your chef has outdone himself." "I'm so pleased to hear it." Lady Harrington's gaze flickered to Genevieve, cold and assessing. "Miss Lawton, I wonder if I might borrow you for a moment? There's someone I particularly wish you to meet." It was phrased as a request, but Genevieve recognized the command beneath the polite words. She glanced uncertainly at the Duke. "Surely it can wait until Miss Lawton has finished her supper," he said, his tone pleasant but firm. Lady Harrington's smile tightened. "I'm afraid Lady Jersey is about to depart, and she expressed such interest in meeting your friend." The emphasis on the last word was slight but unmistakable. Lady Jersey was one of the patronesses of Almack's, the most exclusive social venue in London. Her approval could make or break a young lady's social prospects. "Of course," Genevieve said, rising. "I would be honored." The Duke stood as well. I shall accompany you. Oh, there's no need, Lady Harrington said quickly. I wouldn't dream of taking you from your supper, Your Grace. We'll return Miss Lawton directly. Before either could protest further, Lady Harrington had whisked Genevieve away, leading her not toward the ballroom but down a quiet corridor. Lady Jersey has already left, hasn't she? Genevieve asked, suspicion mounting. How perceptive. Lady Harrington's pretense at friendliness vanished. I merely wished for a private word with you, Miss Lawton. They had reached a small anteroom, empty save for a few chairs and a writing desk. Lady Harrington closed the door behind them. I'll be direct, she said. Your presence here tonight is a curiosity, but your apparent fascination of the Duke of Jarviston is a problem. I assure you, Lady Harrington, please, spare me your protestations of innocence. We both know what game you're playing. The older woman's eyes narrowed. A penniless nobody arrives at one of the most exclusive balls of the season, wearing a gown she could never afford, and immediately captivates the most eligible bachelor in England. It's transparent. Genevieve's cheeks burned with indignation. You're mistaken. Am I? Then perhaps you can explain why a young lady of your immodest background would accept a gown from Lady Helena Spencer, if not to elevate yourself socially. Helena is my friend, Genevieve said, struggling to maintain her composure. She offered the gown as a kindness. Kindness, Lady Harrington repeated skeptically. How convenient. And did this kindness extend to instructions on how to catch a duke's eye? Or was that your own innovation? I did nothing to attract His Grace's attention, Genevieve protested. He approached me. Yes, and that is precisely what concerns me. Lady Harrington stepped closer. James Jarviston is not a man given to impulsive attractions. He is methodical, deliberate in all things. Which leads me to wonder what he sees in you that I do not. Perhaps you should ask him. Impertinent girl. Lady Harrington's voice sharpened. Let me be perfectly clear, whatever designs you have on the Duke, they will not succeed. He requires a wife of suitable rank and connections. Someone who understands the responsibilities of his position. Someone like your niece. Genevieve guessed. Lady Penelope is indeed better suited to the role than a vicar's daughter with nothing to recommend her but a borrowed gown and a pretty face. Lady Harrington's expression hardened. I suggest you find some excuse to leave London immediately. A family emergency, perhaps. Prolonging this, whatever it is, will only result in public humiliation when the Duke's interest inevitably wanes. Genevieve lifted her chin. And if I choose to remain? Then I'm afraid certain truths about tonight's masquerade might find their way to ears less sympathetic than mine. The Tun does not look kindly upon deception, Miss Lawton. Your reputation, and by extension, your father's, would never recover. The threat hung in the air between them. Genevieve's hands trembled, but she kept her voice steady. Are you quite finished, Lady Harrington? For the moment. The older woman moved toward the door. To consider my advice carefully. I'd hate to see a promising young woman ruined over a foolish infatuation. She swept from the room, leaving Genevieve alone with her churning thoughts. The accusation that she had deliberately set out to ensnare the Duke was absurd, yet Lady Harrington clearly believed it. Worse, she was prepared to destroy Genevieve's reputation, and possibly her father's standing in Thornfield, to remove her from the Duke's orbit. The door opened again, and Genevieve tensed, expecting Lady Harrington's return. Instead, Helena slipped into the room, her expression worried. There you are. I've been searching everywhere. Are you well? Lady Harrington looked positively triumphant when she returned to the ballroom alone. Genevieve managed a wan smile. I've been better. Quickly, she related the substance of Lady Harrington's threats. Helena's eyes widened with each word. That spiteful harpy. She dares to threaten you because Jarviston shows you preference over her insipid niece. Helena paced the small room, her silk skirts rustling angrily. We must tell the Duke immediately. He has influence over her, he could put a stop to this. No, Genevieve said firmly. I will not run to his grace with tales like a schoolgirl seeking protection. Besides, involving him would only convince Lady Harrington that I'm setting my cap at him. But you're innocent of her accusations. And how would I prove that? By explaining that I never intended to catch his eye, that his interest is as bewildering to me as it is to everyone else. Genevieve shook her head. No, the simplest solution is to avoid him for the remainder of the evening and return to Lady Weatherby's house as soon as possible. And then what? Hide away for the rest of the season? Lady Harrington's spite won't diminish with time. Perhaps not, but neither will I give her further ammunition. Genevieve smoothed her borrowed gown, steeling herself. Come, we should return to the ballroom before our absence is remarked upon. Helena looked as though she wanted to argue further but seemed to recognize the determination in Genevieve's face. Very well. But promise me you'll speak with Lady Weatherby about this. She's formidable in her own right, and devoted to your protection. I promise, Genevieve agreed, though she doubted her godmother could counter Lady Harrington's malice effectively. They made their way back to the ballroom, where the supper dance had concluded and new sets were forming. Genevieve scanned the crowd anxiously, both hoping and fearing to spot the Duke. There he is, Helena murmured, nodding toward a cluster of gentlemen near the windows. He's looking for you. As if he'd heard her words, the Duke of Jarviston turned, his gaze locking with Genevieve's across the room. His expression darkened as he excused himself and began making his way toward them. I can't speak with him now, Genevieve said, panic rising in her throat. Not after Lady Harrington's accusations. Genevieve, you can't simply, but Genevieve had already slipped away, weaving through the crowd toward the terrace doors. She needed air, space to think clearly. The Duke's attentions, flattering as they were, had placed her in an impossible position. If she continued to accept them, Lady Harrington would make good on her threats. If she rebuffed him publicly, it would cause a different kind of scandal. The terrace was blessedly empty, the night air cool against her flushed skin. Genevieve moved to the stone balustrade, gazing out over the darkened garden below. Lanterns had been strung among the trees, casting pools of golden light along the pathways, but few guests had ventured outside. She drew a deep breath, willing her racing heart to slow. This was madness. One evening in society, and already she was embroiled in the kind of drama she had always disdained in novels. All because a duke had chosen to dance with her. Miss Lawton. She did not need to turn to know who had followed her. His voice, deep and resonant, was already familiar. Your Grace, she replied, not facing him. I apologize for my abrupt departure. It was not of your choosing. It was not a question. Lady Harrington said something to upset you. Now she did turn, surprised by his perception. How did you know? Your expression when you returned to the ballroom. He moved closer, his tall form silhouetted against the light from the windows. What did she say? Genevieve hesitated. To relate Lady Harrington's threats would seem like an appeal for his protection, exactly what she had determined to avoid. It was nothing of consequence. I dislike being lied to, Miss Lawton. Despite the harshness of the words, his tone remained gentle. Elizabeth Harrington does not take young ladies aside for inconsequential matters. She believes I have designs on you, Your Grace, Genevieve said finally, deciding that a partial truth was better than a complete lie. That I wore this gown specifically to attract your notice. And do you? Have designs on me? No. Of course not. The vehemence of her denial surprised even her. That is, I mean no disrespect, Your Grace, but I hardly know you. And I came to London with no expectation of meeting you, let alone anything else. I believe you. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the serious set of his features in the dim light. Now, what did Lady Harrington threaten you with? Genevieve blinked. How did you eat? Elizabeth never simply accuses. She intimidates. His voice hardened slightly. What was it? Social ostracism? Rumors about your character? Both. She suggested that if I did not remove myself from London, and by extension, your vicinity, she would ensure everyone knew about the borrowed gown. That my reputation, and my father's, would suffer. The Duke was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously soft. She overreaches herself. Perhaps, but she has the power to make good on her threats. I am a nobody, Your Grace, easily dismissed and forgotten. Lady Harrington is one of the leading hostesses in London. You are not a nobody, Miss Lawton. He took her hand, his larger one warm around her fingers. And while Elizabeth may be a hostess of note, I am the Duke of Jarviston. My influence somewhat exceeds hers. Genevieve withdrew her hand gently. That's very kind, but I would prefer not to be the cause of conflict between you. It would only confirm her suspicions about my motives. Her suspicions are irrelevant. He studied her face intently. But I understand your concern. Allow me to handle this in my own way. What do you mean? Trust me. His voice softened. Please, Miss Lawton. Return to the ballroom with me. Dance, enjoy yourself. I promise you, Elizabeth Harrington will not trouble you again tonight. Against her better judgment, Genevieve found herself nodding. There was something in his steady gaze, in the quiet confidence of his manner, that inspired trust. He offered his arm, and she placed her hand upon it. As they re-entered the ballroom, she felt the weight of curious stares, but the Duke seemed entirely unperturbed. He led her directly to where Lady Wetherby sat with her friends. Lady Wetherby, he said with a bow. I must thank you for bringing your goddaughter to London. She has brightened an otherwise tedious evening considerably. Her godmother's eyebrows rose, but she inclined her head graciously. How kind of you to say so, Your Grace. Genevieve is a treasure, though I fear London has yet to fully appreciate her. On the contrary, the Duke replied, I believe her qualities are becoming increasingly apparent to those with discernment. He turned to Genevieve. The next set is forming. Would you do me the honor, Miss Lawton? It would be her third dance with him, a clear mark of preference that would set tongues wagging even more furiously. But the determined glint in his eye told her refusal was not an option. With pleasure, Your Grace. As he led her onto the floor, she caught sight of Lady Harrington watching from across the room, her expression thunderous. The Duke followed her gaze and smiled grimly. Observe, he murmured. Before Genevieve could ask what he meant, he had guided her into the set, positioning them directly across from Lord and Lady Jersey. Throughout the dance, he engaged the influential patroness in conversation, drawing Genevieve into their exchange with pointed questions and comments that showcased her wit and knowledge. By the dance's conclusion, Lady Jersey was regarding Genevieve with open interest. You must come to Almack's on Wednesday, Miss Lawton, she declared. I shall send a voucher to Lady Wetherby in the morning. Genevieve cursed, stunned by the unexpected invitation. Thank you, my lady. You're most kind. Not at all. Any protégé of Jarviston's deserves our attention. Lady Jersey cast a knowing glance at the Duke. Though I suspect we shall soon be seeing much more of Miss Lawton, voucher or no. As they moved away, Genevieve turned to the Duke in amazement. Did you arrange that? I merely created an opportunity for Lady Jersey to appreciate your merits, he replied. The invitation was her own decision. But why? Because, Miss Lawton, Lady Jersey's approval is social currency in London. With her voucher in hand, even Elizabeth Harrington would think twice before moving against you. Genevieve stared at him, finally understanding. You're protecting me. I am ensuring you receive fair treatment, nothing more. But there was something in his expression, a warmth, a hint of possessiveness, that suggested his motives might be more complex than mere fairness. I don't know how to thank you. You could start by agreeing to ride with me in the park tomorrow afternoon, he suggested. If your godmother permits, of course. You wish to be seen with me in public? After all the gossip tonight has generated. Especially after all the gossip. His gaze held hers steadily. Unless you'd rather not be associated with me. No. That is, I would be honored, Your Grace. But I must ask, why? Why single me out this way? You must know how it appears. For a moment, he seemed to debate how much to reveal. You intrigue me, Miss Lawton. Your honesty, your intelligence, your quiet strength. In a world of artifice, you are refreshingly genuine. Even when wearing a borrowed gown, she asked, a smile tugging at her lips despite her confusion. Especially then, he replied, his own lips curving. Most young ladies would have been mortified to be discovered in such a situation. You acknowledged it with grace and humor. You make me sound far more composed than I felt. Perhaps I see what others miss. His expression grew serious again. Will you ride with me tomorrow? Genevieve knew she should refuse. One evening of his attention was already enough to make her the subject of widespread speculation. Continuing their association would only fuel the fires Lady Harrington had threatened to ignite. Yet looking into his dark eyes, feeling the strange connection that had sprung between them from their first dance, she found herself unable to say no. Yes, Your Grace. I would like that very much. His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Excellent. Shall we say 3 o'clock? I'll call for you at Lady Weatherby's. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of dances and conversations, but Genevieve was acutely aware of the Duke's presence throughout. He did not dance with her again, propriety dictated a limit to such marked attention, but his gaze followed her across the room, and twice more he appeared at her side to introduce her to influential members of society. By the time Lady Weatherby declared it was time to depart, Genevieve was exhausted yet exhilarated. The evening had been a tumult of emotions, fear, excitement, confusion, and a dangerous, growing fascination with the Duke of Jarviston. As they waited for their carriage, he materialized beside them, bowing over Lady Weatherby's hand before turning to Genevieve. Until tomorrow, Miss Lawton, he said, his voice pitched for her ears alone. Until tomorrow, Your Grace, she replied, a flutter of anticipation in her chest. As the carriage pulled away from Harrington House, Lady Weatherby fixed her goddaughter with a penetrating stare. Well, my girl, you've had quite an evening. The Duke of Jarviston, no less. It was as surprising to me as to anyone, godmother. Lady Weatherby did not sound convinced. He's not a man given to sudden fancies. What did you say to him during that first dance? Very little of consequence, Genevieve replied truthfully. He discovered the gown was borrowed and seemed amused rather than scandalized. Interesting. Her godmother tapped her fingers thoughtfully against the carriage window. And now he wishes to drive with you tomorrow? Yes. I should have consulted you before accepting. If you think it improper, nonsense. The Duke of Jarviston can do no wrong in society's eyes. If he chooses to drive out with you, it can only enhance your standing. Lady Weatherby's shrewd eyes assessed her. But take care, Genevieve. A duke's interest is a double-edged sword. So Helena warned me. Wise girl, that Helena. Heed her advice. Lady Weatherby settled back against the cushions. Now, tell me more about this confrontation with Elizabeth Harrington. By the time they reached Lady Weatherby's townhouse in Berkeley Square, Genevieve had related the entire incident. Her godmother's expression had grown increasingly stormy as the tale unfolded. The nerve of that woman, she muttered as the footman helped them from the carriage. To threaten my goddaughter. And over what? A few dances with Jarviston? As if she has any claim on him. She believes her niece a more suitable match, Genevieve explained as they entered the house. Penelope Mayfield? That insipid, simpering creature. Lady Weatherby snorted inelegantly. The girl can barely string two thoughts together. Jarviston would expire of boredom within a week. Despite her fatigue, Genevieve found herself smiling. You're very loyal, godmother. I'm merely observant. Lady Weatherby paused at the foot of the stairs. Do not fret over Elizabeth's threats, my dear. Between Jarviston's interest and Lady Jersey's voucher, you're well protected. And should any whispers about borrowed gowns arise, we shall simply let it be known that I provided your wardrobe, as is entirely proper for a godmother." "That would be a lie," Genevieve protested. "A small one, in service of a greater truth." Lady Weatherby patted her cheek. "Now off to bed with you. Tomorrow promises to be interesting indeed." Sleep proved elusive, despite Genevieve's exhaustion. Her mind replayed every moment with the Duke, the warmth of his hand at her waist during the waltz, the intensity of his gaze across the supper table, the quiet confidence with which he had promised to protect her from Lady Harrington's malice. What did it mean? Surely a man of his position, with his choice of the most eligible ladies in England, could not seriously be considering her as anything more than a novelty, a temporary diversion from the usual fortune hunters and title seekers. Yet there had been something in his eyes, in the way he spoke to her, that suggested his interest ran deeper than mere amusement. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. Dawn was breaking when she finally drifted into restless slumber, dreaming of dark eyes and whispered secrets. By 3 o'clock the following afternoon, Genevieve was a bundle of nerves. She had changed her dress 4 times, finally settling on a simple but elegant walking dress of pale green muslin, with a Spencer jacket and matching bonnet. Her godmother had pronounced the ensemble suitable for a duke's notice but not desperately seeking it, which Genevieve took as high praise. Now she waited in the drawing-room, pretending to read while Lady Weatherby dozed in her favourite chair. The mantel clock ticked steadily, each minute stretching interminably until, at precisely 3 o'clock, the knocker sounded. A moment later, the butler announced, "His Grace, the Duke of Jarviston." Genevieve rose, her book forgotten, as he entered the room. He was dressed for riding, in a superbly tailored coat of dark blue and buff breeches that emphasized his athletic build. The casual elegance of his attire only accentuated his commanding presence. "Your Grace," Lady Weatherby said, rousing herself. "How prompt you are." "A habit formed in the military, my lady," he replied, bowing over her hand before turning to Genevieve. "Miss Lawton, you look charming." "Thank you, Your Grace." She was mortified to feel a blush rising to her cheeks. "I hope I haven't kept you waiting." "Not at all. I've just arrived." His gaze lingered on her face a moment longer than strictly necessary. "My curricle is outside, if you're ready." Lady Weatherby waved them away. "Go, enjoy the afternoon. But mind you have her home before dark, Your Grace. Even dukes must observe the proprieties." "Of course, Lady Weatherby." The Duke offered Genevieve his arm. "Shall we?" Outside, a gleaming black curricle with a matched pair of bay horses waited, a groom standing attentively at their heads. The Duke handed Genevieve up into the high seat with practiced ease, then rounded to take his place beside her. "Hyde Park?" he inquired as he took up the reins. "As you wish, Your Grace." "James," he said quietly. "When we are not in formal company, I should like you to call me James." Genevieve's eyes widened. "That would be most improper, Your Grace." "Perhaps," he conceded, guiding the horses into the street. "But I find I dislike the formality between us. It creates a distance I have no wish to maintain." His words sent a flutter of warmth through her chest. "I'm not certain I understand your meaning, Your Gr," she caught herself. "James." His name felt strange on her tongue, intimate in a way that made her pulse quicken. He smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his serious countenance. "Much better. And in return, I shall call you Genevieve, if I may." "You may," she agreed, wondering at her own boldness. "Though perhaps not at Hyde Park, where all of London will be watching and listening." A fair compromise. He handled the ribbons with expert skill, navigating through the busy streets toward the park. "Did you sleep well after your triumphant debut?" "Hardly triumphant," she demurred. "And no, not particularly well. My thoughts were unsettled." "By Lady Harrington's threats?" "Partly." She hesitated, then added truthfully, "and partly by you." He glanced at her, surprise and pleasure mingling in his expression. "Me? Your attention last night was unexpected." I found myself wondering why the Duke of Jarviston would single out a vicar's daughter with no fortune or connections. "Is it so difficult to believe I might simply enjoy your company?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes serious. "In a world where marriages are made for advantage and alliance?" "Yes, rather." "A fair point." He guided the curricle through the gates of Hyde Park, where the fashionable hour was just beginning. Carriages and riders filled the broad paths, London's elite on display for mutual admiration and criticism. "I won't insult your intelligence by pretending such considerations don't exist," he continued. "But neither am I bound by them as others might be. My position grants me certain freedoms, including the freedom to choose my own company based on preference rather than expectation." "And you prefer my company?" "Evidently, or we would not be having this conversation." His lips quirked in a half-smile. "You're direct, Genevieve. Another quality I admire." Before she could respond, they were hailed by a group of riders. Lord Richard Spencer and several other gentlemen Genevieve recognized from the ball approached, their curiosity poorly disguised as casual greeting. "Jarviston! Miss Lawton!" "What a pleasant surprise," Lord Richard called, bringing his mount alongside the curricle. The Duke nodded coolly. "Spencer." "Gentlemen." Introductions were made, and Genevieve found herself the object of frank assessment from the assembled men. She bore their scrutiny with as much composure as she could muster, aware that their appearance together in the park would cement the speculation begun at the ball. "Lady Jersey tells me you're to receive a voucher for Almack's, Miss Lawton," one of the gentlemen remarked. "Quite an honor for a newcomer to London." "Lady Jersey is most kind," Genevieve replied neutrally. "Indeed she is," the Duke interjected, his tone discouraging further comment. "If you'll excuse us, gentlemen. Miss Lawton and I were just discussing the merits of Wordsworth's poetry." This transparent fiction was received with knowing smiles, but the gentlemen tipped their hats and moved on, no doubt eager to spread the news of the Duke's continued attention to the mysterious Miss Lawton. "Wordsworth?" Genevieve asked once they were out of earshot. "It seemed preferable to admitting we were discussing my personal preferences," he replied with a slight smile. "Though if you wish to discuss poetry, I'm entirely at your disposal. I confess I prefer Byron, though my father disapproves of his more scandalous works. As any respectable vicar should." The Duke guided the curricle past a fashionable barouche, acknowledging its occupants with a nod. "Though I suspect you've read them anyway." Genevieve's cheeks warmed. "What makes you say that?" "The same curiosity that makes you wish to see Rome and Athens would hardly allow Byron's poetry to remain unread simply because it's deemed inappropriate." She laughed softly. "You've discovered me, Your Grace. I did borrow Don Juan from my father's locked cabinet when I was 16. The key was not well hidden." "And what did you think of it?" "That Byron understands far too well how people truly think and feel beneath their polite exteriors," she admitted. "And that perhaps that's why he's considered dangerous." The Duke looked at her with open admiration. "You continue to surprise me, Genevieve." "Is that a compliment?" "The highest," he assured her. Predictability is the death of interest. As they completed their circuit of the park, Genevieve became increasingly aware of the stir their appearance together was creating. Ladies paused in their conversations to stare, gentlemen nodded with speculative expressions, and everywhere, whispers followed in their wake. "We've become the afternoon's entertainment," she observed. "Does that trouble you?" he asked. "It's uncomfortable," she admitted. "I'm not accustomed to such scrutiny." "You hide it well." He guided the curricle toward a less crowded path. "Would you prefer to leave? There's a charming tea garden not far from here where we might converse with fewer observers." The suggestion was mildly improper. A tea garden offered far less public scrutiny than Hyde Park, but Genevieve found herself nodding. "Yes, please." He turned the curricle toward the park gates, and soon they were traveling along quieter streets. The tea garden, when they reached it, proved to be a tranquil oasis of greenery, with small tables set among flowering shrubs and a modest fountain playing at its center. The proprietress, a plump, cheerful woman, clearly recognized the Duke, though she gave no indication beyond a particularly deep curtsy. She led them to a secluded table near the back of the garden and promised tea and cakes forthwith. "You come here often?" Genevieve asked as they settled at the wrought iron table. "Occasionally, when I wish to escape the relentless sociability of the ton," he replied. "Mrs. Pemberton is the soul of discretion and serves the best seed cake in London." "I see." Genevieve studied him curiously. "You're not what I expected, Your Grace." "James," he reminded her gently. "And what did you expect?" "Someone more conventional, I suppose. More concerned with society's opinion. I've spent too many years watching men die to worry overmuch about whether lady this or lord that approves of my choice of tea garden." His expression sobered. "War has a way of clarifying what truly matters." "And what matters to you?" she asked, genuinely curious. He considered the question thoughtfully as Mrs. Pemberton returned with a laden tray. Once they were alone again, he spoke. "Honor. Duty. Family, though mine is small now, just a younger sister, married and living in the north. The well-being of those dependent on my estates." He paused, his gaze meeting hers directly. "And increasingly, the hope of finding a partner who values the same things, who can see beyond the title and fortune to the man beneath." The weight of his gaze made Genevieve's breath catch. Was he suggesting? No, surely not. They had met just yesterday. "A worthy list," she said carefully. "Though I imagine finding such a partner is challenging in your position. How would you know if someone valued you or merely the dukedom?" A perceptive question. He took a sip of tea. "One tests character over time, I suppose. Observes how a person treats others when no advantage is to be gained. Listens to what they say, and don't say, about matters of consequence." "And have you been testing me, Your Grace?" she asked, a note of challenge entering her voice. His lips curved. "Perhaps. Though I find myself more convinced of your character with each passing hour." "Based on what evidence?" "Your honesty about the gown. Your refusal to appeal to me against Lady Harrington. The way you speak of your father and your home, with affection, but without idealization." He leaned forward slightly. "The fact that you question my interest rather than simply accepting it as your due." Genevieve felt a flutter of something dangerous in her chest, not quite hope, but its reckless cousin. "You've drawn significant conclusions from limited evidence, Your Grace." "James," he corrected again. "And I've always been a quick study." The afternoon passed in conversation that ranged from literature to politics, from his experiences in the war to her life in Thornfield. Genevieve found herself speaking more freely than she ever had with anyone outside her immediate family, drawn out by his genuine interest and thoughtful responses. As promised, the seed cake was excellent, and the privacy of their secluded table allowed for a frankness that would have been impossible in Hyde Park or a formal drawing room. When the Duke finally noted the time and suggested they should return, Genevieve was startled to discover that nearly 2 hours had passed. They had talked through the fashionable hour entirely, and the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. "I've monopolized your afternoon," he said as he handed her up into the curricle once more. "I've enjoyed every moment," she replied honestly. "Thank you for the escape from prying eyes." "My pleasure." His hand lingered on hers a moment longer than necessary. "Though I fear our absence from the park will have generated even more speculation." "Let them speculate," she said with newfound boldness. "We know the truth." His eyes warmed with approval. "Indeed we do." The drive back to Berkeley Square was companionable, their conversation continuing easily. By the time they arrived at Lady Weatherby's house, Genevieve felt as though she had known the Duke for years rather than a day. He handed her down from the curricle, retaining her fingers in his. "Might I call on you tomorrow, Genevieve?" "I would like that," she replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks at the familiarity of his address, and her own eager response. "Until tomorrow, then." He raised her hand to his lips, his eyes never leaving hers. The gesture, though entirely proper, felt intimate in a way that made her breath catch. Until tomorrow, James, she whispered, the use of his given name still thrilling and forbidden. With a bow, he released her hand and returned to his curricle. Genevieve watched him drive away, her thoughts in pleasant disarray. Inside, Lady Weatherby was awaiting her with ill-concealed curiosity. "Well? How was your drive with the Duke?" "Enlightening," Genevieve replied, a smile playing at her lips. "Enlightening," her godmother repeated skeptically. "That's all you have to say about an afternoon spent in the exclusive company of one of England's most eligible bachelors?" "We talked, godmother, about books and travel and his experiences in the war." "And did this conversation involve any particular revelations regarding his intentions toward you?" Genevieve hesitated. "Nothing explicit, but he wishes to call tomorrow." Lady Weatherby's eyebrows rose. 3 consecutive days of his undivided attention? "My dear, you've made quite an impression." "So it would seem," Genevieve agreed, still somewhat bewildered by the turn of events. "Though I can scarcely credit it myself." "Well, I for one am not surprised." Her godmother settled back in her chair with satisfaction. "You possess qualities far more valuable than the superficial attractions most young ladies rely upon. Intelligence, character, genuine warmth, these are rare commodities in the marriage mart." "You speak as though a proposal is imminent," Genevieve protested. "We've known each other barely a day." "Some connections require little time to recognize their value," Lady Weatherby replied cryptically. "Now, tell me more about this tea garden he took you to." "Most unconventional, but entirely in character for Jarviston." As Genevieve recounted their afternoon, she found herself analyzing each word, each glance exchanged between them, searching for hidden meanings. Had the Duke truly been testing her character, as he suggested? And if so, what conclusion had he reached? The following morning brought a delivery of hothouse flowers, a simple but exquisite arrangement of white roses and forget-me-nots, accompanied by a note in a bold, masculine hand, "Until this afternoon." With admiration, Genevieve traced the signature with a finger, a smile playing at her lips. Such a gesture could not be misconstrued, it was a clear declaration of interest, visible to anyone who saw the flowers or heard of their arrival. Lady Weatherby certainly thought so. "White roses signify purity and worthiness," she observed when Genevieve showed her the bouquet. "Forget-me-nots represent true love and fidelity. The Duke is making his intentions rather plain, wouldn't you say?" "Surely not," Genevieve protested, though her heart beat faster at the thought. "It's a simple courtesy after our drive yesterday." "My dear girl, dukes do not send flowers as simple courtesies," her godmother replied dryly. "When they send flowers at all, which is rare enough, it is with deliberate purpose." Before Genevieve could respond, the butler announced another caller, Lady Helena Spencer. Helena burst into the drawing-room in a flurry of excitement. "Genevieve! Is it true? Did you spend yesterday afternoon secluded in a tea garden with the Duke of Jarviston?" Genevieve groaned. "How could you possibly know that? It's all over London. Mrs. Pemberton's nephew is valet to Lord Rutherford, who told his sister, who told my mother at breakfast." Helena's eye sparkled with mischief. "The ton is in an uproar. Lady Harrington reportedly broke a vase when she heard." "Oh dear." Genevieve sank into a chair. "This is precisely what I hoped to avoid." "Nonsense," Lady Weatherby interjected. "This is exactly what Jarviston intended." Both young ladies turned to her in surprise. "What do you mean, Lady Weatherby?" Helena asked. "The Duke is no fool," the older woman explained. "He knew perfectly well that taking Miss Lawton to a secluded tea garden would set tongues wagging. Just as he knew dancing with her 3 times at the Harrington ball would mark her as an object of his special attention. But why would he deliberately court scandal?" Genevieve asked, bewildered. "Not scandal, my dear. Speculation." Lady Weatherby's eyes gleamed with approval. "By making his interests so public, he's effectively placed you under his protection. Who would dare speak against a young lady so openly favored by the Duke of Jarviston?" "Lady Harrington, for one," Helena pointed out. Elizabeth Harrington has already played her hand and found it weaker than she imagined, Lady Weatherby replied dismissively. With Lady Jersey's voucher secured and the Duke's preference made plain, she has little power to harm you now. Genevieve considered this analysis, finding it disturbingly plausible. But that would suggest the Duke has been managing the situation from the beginning. Of course he has, her godmother agreed. James Jarviston didn't earn his reputation as a strategist by leaving matters to chance. He saw something in you that interested him, and he's systematically removing obstacles to his pursuit. Put that way, it sounded calculating, even manipulative. Yet Genevieve could not reconcile that characterization with the man she had come to know over their hours of conversation, thoughtful, honorable, and surprisingly vulnerable beneath his confident exterior. I think you misjudge him, godmother, she said finally. His actions may have had those effects, but I don't believe they were so coldly planned. Believe what you will, Lady Weatherby replied with a knowing smile. But remember, the most effective strategies are those that appear natural and spontaneous. Helena, who had been following this exchange with fascination, finally spoke. Well, planned or not, it's working. The flowers are lovely, by the way. When is he calling today? This afternoon, Genevieve answered, still unsettled by Lady Weatherby's assessment. Though I'm beginning to wonder if I should receive him. Don't be absurd, both Helena and Lady Weatherby said in unison. Whatever his methods, his interest appears genuine, her godmother added more gently. And if you return that interest, as I suspect you do, you would be foolish to withdraw now over injured pride. It's not pride, Genevieve protested. I don't know what it is. I just dislike feeling that I'm being managed, however benevolent the intent. Then tell him so, Helena suggested practically. The Duke strikes me as a man who would appreciate honesty. Genevieve nodded slowly. Perhaps I shall. The remainder of the morning passed in a flutter of activity. Another delivery arrived, this time, the promised voucher for Almack's, accompanied by a note from Lady Jersey expressing her anticipation of Miss Lawton's attendance the following Wednesday. This was followed by calls from several ladies who had previously shown no interest in making Lady Weatherby's goddaughter's acquaintance, but who now discovered an urgent need to welcome her to London society. By the time the Duke's curricle drew up before the house at precisely 3 o'clock, Genevieve's emotions were a tangle of anticipation, indignation, and a persistent, inconvenient warmth that rose whenever she thought of him. He entered the drawing-room with his usual confidence, but his eyes sought hers immediately, his expression softening when he found her. Miss Lawton, he said, bowing over her hand. Lady Weatherby. Your Grace, Genevieve replied, deliberately formal. How kind of you to call. A flicker of surprise crossed his face at her cool tone. The pleasure is mine. I trust you received my flowers. Yes, thank you. They're lovely. An awkward silence fell, broken by Lady Weatherby rising from her chair. I just recalled an urgent letter that requires my attention, she announced transparently. You'll excuse me, Your Grace. Genevieve, do ring if you need anything. With that less than subtle departure, they were left alone, separated by the length of the drawing-room and the sudden tension between them. The Duke studied her face. You're displeased with me? Not displeased, exactly, Genevieve replied, moving to the window rather than inviting him to sit. Confused, perhaps. Uncertain of your intentions. He followed her, keeping a respectful distance. I thought I had made my intentions reasonably clear. Have you? She turned to face him. Or have you simply been managing the situation, as my godmother suggests? Creating circumstances that serve your purposes while appearing spontaneous. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Ah. Lady Weatherby has been analyzing my tactics. So you don't deny it? I deny nothing, he said calmly. Yes, I have been deliberate in my actions. I saw a young woman of exceptional quality being threatened for catching my attention, and I took steps to ensure her protection. Without consulting me, Genevieve pointed out. Without asking if I wished for such protection, or in what form. Would you have preferred I leave you vulnerable to Lady Harrington's malice? I would have preferred to be treated as a thinking being capable of participation in decisions that affect my life and reputation, she replied with heat. Not as a chess piece to be moved about the board according to your strategy. His expression sobered. You're right, of course. I should have consulted you. It's a habit formed over years of command, making decisions for others for their own good. An unattractive quality in a duke, an indefensible one in. He hesitated. In what, Your Grace? She prompted, her irritation softening at his evident contrition. In a man who hopes to be more than a casual acquaintance, he finished quietly. Forgive me, Genevieve. My intentions were honorable, but my methods were high-handed. The simple apology, offered without excuse or qualification, disarmed her completely. You're forgiven, she said, a smile tugging at her lips despite herself. Though I reserve the right to point out similar behavior in future. I would expect nothing less. His own smile returned, warm and genuine. Does this mean I may stay, or shall I depart in disgrace? Stay, she said, gesturing to a nearby chair. Though I warn you, I have questions. I am at your disposal. He seated himself, watching as she took the chair opposite. Ask what you will. Why me? The question that had burned in her mind since their first dance finally found voice. Of all the young ladies in London, why single out a penniless vicar's daughter for your attention? He considered his answer carefully. Initially, it was curiosity. You stood behind that column, clearly uncomfortable yet determined to face the evening with dignity. I admired that quiet courage. And then? And then I discovered you were wearing a borrowed gown, yet handling the potential for embarrassment with grace rather than mortification. It intrigued me. His gaze held hers steadily. Every interaction since has only deepened my interest. Your intelligence, your integrity, your unusual combination of propriety and independence of thought, these are rare qualities, Genevieve. Qualities that might be found in a duchess, she asked bluntly. Yes, he replied, equally direct. Though that is getting rather ahead of ourselves, wouldn't you say? Heat flooded her cheeks. I didn't mean to suggest, I know. His expression gentled. But I appreciate your frankness. Too many young ladies would dance around such questions, pretending disinterest while maneuvering toward precisely such an outcome. I have never been skilled at such games, Genevieve admitted. My father always says I'm too forthright for polite society. Your father sounds like a sensible man. I look forward to meeting him someday. The casual reference to a future meeting with her father sent a thrill through her that she tried desperately to suppress. It was too soon for such thoughts, regardless of how genuine the Duke's interest seemed. You mentioned yesterday that you value honor and duty, she said, changing the subject slightly. What of love? Does that factor into your considerations for marriage? A bold question, Miss Lawton, he observed, though his eyes showed approval rather than offense. Yes, love factors into my considerations. I have seen too many loveless marriages of convenience to wish such a fate for myself or my future wife. Even if love led you to someone society might deem unsuitable. Society's definition of suitability is narrow and often misguided, he replied. Birth and fortune are poor predictors of happiness or compatibility. Easy words for a duke to speak, she said, a note of challenge in her voice. You have the luxury of choice. Most do not. True, he acknowledged. But having that luxury, I would be a fool to waste it pursuing a conventional match at the expense of genuine feeling. Genevieve studied him, trying to discern whether his words matched his true beliefs. And your family? Would they share this view? My parents are long dead, and my sister's only wish is for my happiness, he said. But you're right to raise the question. Family resistance can be a significant obstacle, as can societal pressure. Which is why dukes typically marry the daughters of earls and marquises, not obscure country vicars. Typically, yes. He leaned forward, his gaze intent. But I have never aspired to typicality, Genevieve. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken possibilities. Genevieve found herself unable to look away from the warmth in his dark eyes, the question implicit in his steady regard. The moment was broken by the return of Lady Weatherby, who entered with a transparently false air of surprise. "Oh, you're still here, Your Grace. How pleasant." "Indeed, Lady Weatherby. Miss Lawton has been kind enough to entertain me with conversation about the nature of suitable marriages," he replied, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Has she, indeed?" Her godmother's eyebrows rose. "A theoretical discussion, I trust?" For the moment, the Duke agreed, rising from his chair. "Though I find my views on the subject evolving rather rapidly of late." Genevieve felt her cheeks warm once more. "Your Grace is teasing, godmother." "I assure you, I am entirely serious," he replied, his eyes meeting hers with unmistakable intent. "But I have taken enough of your time for one afternoon. Lady Weatherby, Miss Lawton, I bid you good day." As he took his leave, Genevieve found herself both relieved and disappointed by his departure. Their conversation had left her with more questions than answers, yet she could not deny the growing certainty that the Duke of Jarviston's interest in her was neither casual nor temporary. "Well?" Lady Weatherby demanded once they were alone. "Did you scold him properly for his high-handedness?" "I expressed my concerns," Genevieve replied, a smile playing at her lips. "He apologized most handsomely." "I imagine he did," her godmother said dryly. "And then proceeded to charm you out of your indignation entirely." "Not entirely," Genevieve protested, though without much conviction. "But he was forthright about his methods and his motives." "And those motives would be?" Genevieve hesitated, unwilling to voice her growing suspicions about the Duke's intentions. To do so would make them real, and reality brought with it the possibility of disappointment. "He admires certain qualities he believes I possess," she said finally. "Whether that admiration will lead anywhere remains to be seen." Lady Weatherby snorted. "My girl, that man is halfway to a declaration already. Mark my words, by the end of the season, you'll be planning a wedding at Westminster Abbey." "Godmother? That's absurd. We scarcely know each other." "Some connections require little time to recognize their value," her godmother repeated, echoing her words from the previous day. "Besides, the Duke is not a young man in his first flush of infatuation. He's 30 years old, has seen war and death, and knows his own mind. If he's decided you're the woman he wants, he's unlikely to change course." Genevieve shook her head, unwilling to let hope take too firm a root. "We shall see." But over the days that followed, the Duke's actions did little to discourage such hope. He called at Berkeley Square daily, sometimes for mere minutes, sometimes for hours of conversation. He accompanied Genevieve and Lady Weatherby to the theatre, where his appearance in their box caused a sensation. He sent flowers every morning, each arrangement more exquisite than the last. And most telling of all, he made no effort to conceal his preference. In drawing rooms and at dinner parties, his attention invariably sought her out. At Almack's, where Genevieve made her debut on Wednesday evening, he claimed 2 dances, the maximum allowed by propriety, and might have claimed more had Lady Jersey herself not reminded him of the rules. By the end of her first week in London society, Genevieve found herself in the bewildering position of being courted, quite openly and determinedly, by the Duke of Jarviston. Lady Harrington, her threats rendered impotent by the Duke's public favour, maintained a frigid civility when their paths crossed. Her niece, Lady Penelope, looked on with poorly disguised resentment as the man she had hoped to catch lavished attention on a nobody from Hertfordshire. The Ton, ever adaptable, adjusted its collective assessment of Miss Genevieve Lawton with remarkable speed. The borrowed gown of her debut was forgotten, now she was described as refreshingly unconventional, a breath of country air in the stale London atmosphere, and, most amusingly, clearly possessed of hidden charms to have so thoroughly captivated Jarviston. Through it all, Genevieve attempted to maintain a level head, neither assuming too much nor allowing herself to be overwhelmed by the whirlwind of attention. But in quiet moments, when she allowed herself to examine her own feelings, she could not deny the truth: she was falling in love with the Duke of Jarviston. It wasn't merely his handsome face or his position, though neither detracted from his appeal. It was the man himself, thoughtful and honorable, possessed of a quiet strength and unexpected humor. The way he listened when she spoke, truly listened, as though her thoughts mattered to him. The gentleness in his touch when he handed her into a carriage or led her onto the dance floor. The respect with which he treated everyone, from Lady Jersey to the footman who attended him. And increasingly, it was the way he looked at her when he thought no one was watching, with a tenderness that made her breath catch and her heart race. On the 10th day of their acquaintance, the Duke invited Genevieve to ride with him to Richmond, where he had arranged a private luncheon at an inn overlooking the Thames. Lady Wetherby, satisfied with the presence of his groom as chaperone, gave her blessing to the excursion. The day was perfect, warm sunshine, a gentle breeze, the countryside vibrant with spring blossoms. As they drove through the leafy lanes, Genevieve felt a sense of rightness, of belonging, that she had never experienced before. The inn was charming, its garden terrace affording a spectacular view of the river below. Their table, set apart from the few other diners, allowed for conversation without concern for eavesdroppers. "I've missed this," the Duke said as they seated themselves. "The peace of the countryside. London can be stifling after a time." "Do you prefer your estates, then?" Genevieve asked. "I don't believe you've mentioned where your principal seat is located." "Jarviston Park is in Derbyshire," he replied. "A beautiful property, though I've spent too little time there in recent years, between the war and my responsibilities in Parliament." "Will you return there when the season ends?" "That depends," he said, his eyes meeting hers with a warmth that made her pulse quicken. "On several factors." Before she could inquire further, a waiter appeared with their first course, a delicate soup of spring vegetables. The interruption broke the moment, and their conversation turned to lighter topics as they enjoyed their meal. It was only as they lingered over dessert that the Duke returned to more personal matters. "I've received a letter from my sister," he said, watching her face carefully. "She's coming to London next week with her husband." "How lovely for you," Genevieve replied, sensing there was more to this announcement than a simple family visit. "Yes, though her timing is deliberate." He hesitated, then added, "She's heard rumors of my interest in a certain vicar's daughter and is determined to meet you herself." Genevieve's heart skipped a beat. "Meet me? But surely the Duke of Jarviston wouldn't introduce his sister to a young lady unless his intentions were serious," he finished for her, a smile playing at his lips. "Precisely." She stared at him, scarcely able to credit what he seemed to be implying. "James, we've known each other barely a fortnight." 13 days, he corrected, his expression growing serious. "And in that time, I have learned more about your character, your mind, and your heart than I might discover about another woman in a year of conventional courtship. But I know it seems rushed," he continued, reaching across the table to take her hand. "By society standards, certainly. But I am not a young man acting on impulse, Genevieve. I know my own mind and heart." "And what do they tell you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That I have found in you everything I never dared hope for in a partner," he said simply. "Intelligence, integrity, warmth, courage. A woman who sees the man behind the title and isn't afraid to challenge him when he deserves it." Genevieve's breath caught. "You make me sound far more impressive than I am. On the contrary, I suspect I've only begun to discover your qualities." His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "The question is, do you feel anything similar for me? Or have I mistaken courtesy for deeper regard?" She looked into his eyes, dark and intent upon her face, and found she could not dissemble. "You haven't mistaken anything," she said softly. "My regard for you is profound. But James, there are practical considerations." "The disparity in our stations is irrelevant to me," he interrupted firmly. "I told you once, I have the luxury of choice. I choose you, Genevieve Lawton, exactly as you are." "And what of society? Your peers? They will say you married beneath you." "Let them say what they will." His voice hardened slightly. "I've faced cannon fire and cavalry charges. I can certainly weather drawing-room whispers." Despite her concerns, Genevieve couldn't suppress a smile. When you put it that way, it sounds rather trivial. It is trivial, he insisted. What matters is what we feel for each other, not what others think of our match. And what exactly do you feel? She asked, her heart racing with anticipation. His expression softened, the sternness melting away to reveal a vulnerability that touched her deeply. I love you, Genevieve. I believe I began to fall in love with you the moment you admitted to borrowing that periwinkle gown, with such a blend of embarrassment and defiance in your eyes. James, she breathed, tears pricking behind her eyelids. I love you too. But it seems impossible, a duke and a vicar's daughter. Nothing worth having is ever impossible, he said, raising her hand to his lips. Only challenging. And I have never shied from a challenge. She laughed through her tears. No, I imagine you haven't. Then say you'll marry me, he urged, his eyes alight with hope and determination. Say you'll become my duchess, wear borrowed gowns no longer, and make Jarviston Park a true home again. Yes, she whispered, her heart too full for eloquence. Yes, I will marry you. His smile was brilliant, transforming his serious face into something approaching radiance. You've made me the happiest of men. And I the most surprised of women, she replied, returning his smile with equal warmth. When I arrived at that ball in Helena's gown, I never imagined that the Duke of Jarviston would ask your secret in a whisper, and end up asking for your hand in marriage, he finished, his eyes dancing with amusement. Precisely. She shook her head in wonder. It seems like a fairy tale. The best kind, he agreed. One based in truth and genuine feeling, rather than enchantment. As they drove back to London, the future stretching bright before them, Genevieve reflected on the strange workings of fate. A borrowed gown, a whispered question, a fortnight of unexpected courtship, and now, against all probability, she would soon become a duchess. But more importantly, she would become the wife of a man she loved and respected, who loved and respected her in return. Title and fortune were mere accessories to that central truth. And that, she decided, was a secret worth keeping safe in her heart long after the borrowed periwinkle gown was forgotten.